Hello and welcome to the Political Opinions podcast, where every opinion is given equal footing and political tolerance and debate are given their proper attention in a world where both are on the decline. Today's episode will cover different opinions on the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. Turn on any news channel, pick up any newspaper, and go on any Gen Z girl's Instagram story, and you will find that they are all likely covering the same thing: Afghanistan. The rapid Taliban reconquest of the country and subsequent scramble to evacuate as many people as possible has become an international issue. The chaos caused since the US withdrawal has led to many people questioning whether or not it was really a good idea. Today, we will take a brief glimpse into this very complex political situation as we unpack and compare these opinions. The key argument behind Joe Biden's decision to withdraw troops is that the war has been going on for too long. It has been 20 years since US and NATO troops first invaded Afghanistan, and since then thousands of lives and trillions of dollars have been spent on the conflict. A conflict which has not seen the Taliban defeated, and for some, all of this cost, without the defeat of the Taliban, is seen as simply too much, and it's time for troops to come home. Now, one reason the US is satisfied with leaving is that they believe the risk of further terrorist attacks on US soil is simply too low to justify a continued military presence. The key target of the war, Osama bin Laden, is dead, and many of the terrorist cells, like the Islamic State, have had their capability to conduct terrorist attacks on foreign soil greatly reduced. Alongside the Taliban agreement, therefore, to stop aiding terrorists, many feel like the US mission has been completed. Now, the point of this US mission, is one that is very divisive. Joe Biden's administration have argued that the US mission in Afghanistan was never about nation building, but rather was part of its wider war on terrorism. Following this line of thought, the continued presence of US troops in Afghanistan is not necessary. The mission George Bush initially set out to accomplish has been fulfilled, and the fate of the Afghan people are their own. Now, it's a good thing that Tony Blair is not with me, because he would have just had a big go at me for saying the Afghan people need to look after themselves. But that is exactly what many people have argued. The reconquest by the Taliban occurred greatly in part due to the Afghan security forces' failure to really offer a fight back. Most soldiers simply ran away, which isn't great. And a part of the reason behind this was that the Afghan government and military were both inefficient and relatively corrupt. Some argue the Afghan government's failure caused the country's fate, and it should not have to fall to foreign troops to secure a foreign nation. At this point, if I'm glad Tony Blair is not here to attack me, I'm also quite glad I'm not on Instagram or Twitter right now, because this point would unleash the hordes of activists. Now, what would cause this, you may ask? This is the answer. Some people believe the US and other countries have no responsibility and owe nothing to the people of Afghanistan. They argue the people of this country should fight for themselves and should rely on themselves. The fear of the Taliban should be accompanied by action against them, not simply running away. As Biden said, we can't save everyone, and some believe we have no responsibility to save these people. Despite many people really not liking to see the horrible suffering the Afghan people are experiencing, we cannot hide from the fact that most of the US and UK, for that matter, electorate supported and continued to support the eventual withdrawal of troops from the country. The populations want their governments to focus on issues at home, not spend money and lives fighting other countries' wars for them. The US is not a global policeman, it's a democracy, and democracies have to follow the will of their people. And if the US people don't want to be at war, you can't really argue they should be, at least to some. Considering the great cost the US has paid towards Afghanistan, it is no surprise that the people of that country on a whole don't want the war to continue. 2,500 lives lost, and nearly $1 trillion has been spent. This war has come at tremendous cost, and given that staying for even another 20 years might seemingly have done very little to change the final outcome, there was a genuine case behind the view that it is time to bring everyone home and end the longest war in US history. At this point, I would like to say that if you are either a social media activist or Tony Blair, and you want to kill me for what I've just said, don't worry, because every debate has two sides. Firstly, although the war has taken 20 years and cost a lot, leaving now would mean that those 20 years will potentially, and will ultimately, have gone to waste. With the Taliban back in control, has anything really changed for the country? By leaving before the mission is done, some believe it means all that cost has simply gone to waste. We must also question how safe the US really is from terrorism today. Some people fear that under Taliban control, Afghanistan will become a haven for terrorists, and many people, surprisingly enough, don't trust the Taliban to keep their promises. Only with troops on the ground can the risk be really eliminated, but instead we have left and now have to simply hope nothing happens as a result. Now this also brings into question what the US mission really was, if you will. Although it may have started as counter-terrorism, the fact that there have been troops present for 20 years, and given the massive efforts put toward helping prop up the Afghan government, arm and train their army and so on, some believe the mission became nation building. Although the original aim was to do with terrorism and catching Osama bin Laden, the new aim has been to help the Afghan people, and so leaving is a failure of that US mission. This belief in a failed mission really owes a lot to essentially this belief that there is a duty to the people of Afghanistan, and it's critical to points such as those raised by Tony Blair. There was always a risk the Afghan government could collapse, and allowing that risk to occur is seen by some as morally wrong. Some argue the US should always have kept small numbers of troops on the ground in order to provide more security. Although the Afghan government failed, there is no excuse to justify the abandonment of the Afghan people. And this is really the critical point at the moment, given all the scenes at Kabul airport and people trying to escape the country. These people, the Afghan people, put their trust and lives in the hands of a foreign power after that foreign power invaded, which claimed to have liberated and protected them from the Taliban. But with the withdrawal of US troops, some believe that trust has been betrayed, and we have abandoned these people to suffer under a regime which many people would not really call a nice one, let's be honest here. Now, not only is this a disaster for the Afghan people, but there is also a genuine risk to wider US foreign policy aims. This defeat has greatly helped China and Russia, who are likely to recognise this Taliban government as legitimate, thus gaining influence in the region at the cost of the United States. The US, to some, has signalled to the world that it cannot be trusted and is no longer in a place to help people, and to some, that may be very costly in the future. All of this means that to some, the cost was for nothing. All the money and lives have gone to waste, as the country ultimately ends up back in the same place as it was before the US arrival. Why leave now? No American lives have been lost in 18 months, although, minus the explosion by the Islamic State, that point doesn't really stand, although I could say no lives have been lost to the Taliban in 18 months, and there is clearly still work to do. The US withdrawal means that they lost this war, and the Afghan people have lost far more. With all of this death and destruction, let's take a minute to appreciate the joys of the comparison, will we? Firstly, on this question of how long the war has been, well, to some, they believe that given the war has gone on this long and the Taliban are still here, the success isn't really going to come, and as such it's time to come home. Others, however, believe that although we haven't completed the mission of defeating the Taliban, if you will, leaving now means that it puts the last 20 years to waste. You don't give up, if you will, before the mission is completed, and to some that is exactly what is happening. On this point of security threats, Some believe that the US presence isn't needed because security threats from Afghanistan are not that present. The Taliban have agreed to stop aiding and taking part in terrorism and want to be seen as legitimate, and the key target Osama bin Laden and Islamic State and Al-Qaeda and all these terrorist groups are essentially unable now to conduct as high capacity terrorist attacks on US soil. Others, however, believe that just because these terrorist groups have not been as active doesn't mean they won't continue to be and potentially be more active. With the Taliban in control, there is a potential Afghan will become a haven for extremists, and only with troops present do some believe the risk can be truly eliminated. On the question of what was the US mission, some believe the US mission was never about nation building. It was always about stopping terrorism, and as such it is up to the people of Afghanistan to find their own path, not for the US to decide it for them. Others, however, believe that despite original aims, the war became about nation building, and we therefore have a duty to the people of Afghanistan, given that we've put so much effort into helping rebuild their nation. On this question of how much responsibility really lies with the Afghan security forces and government, some believe these security forces should have done more. The failure was not the US withdrawal, but rather the essential incapacity of the Afghanistan security forces to fight against the Taliban. Others, however, believe that we should have always kept troops on the ground. There was always a risk that security forces could collapse, and keeping small numbers present would have been far more stable and secure. Then on how does this impact the people of Afghanistan? Some believe it's not the US's job to protect everyone in Afghan, and although it may be sad that people are suffering, that's not ultimately the responsibility of any other country to deal with. And despite that, tens of thousands of people have been evacuated, so we're not abandoning them. Others, however, believe that we have morally failed in our responsibility to protect these people, and we have left them to suffer under the Taliban, which is not exactly a good thing. On this question of how it's going to impact international relations, some believe it isn't really that important. This earmarks the end of a previous liberal period of US foreign interventions, and the US now should focus instead on itself and other issues, not entirely on the Middle East. Others believe that this will be a strategic cost to the United States and be a benefit to Russia and China. They will ally with the new Taliban regime, blocking out the United States from that area. And finally, on how this war has affected the United States, and this point can apply to other nations, but it's really on the United States, given they were the primary player in all of this. Some believe that given the US has lost thousands of troops and trillions of dollars, it's time to end the cost and bring everyone home. We shouldn't send people to die and spend money to be wasted potentially in foreign wars anymore. However, others believe that leaving now means everything done goes to waste. All those lives lost, all that money spent, and there's nothing to come out of it beyond the Taliban back in control. Furthermore, no one has died in 18 months, to the Taliban at least, so lives aren't really being lost on such an extreme level. Overall, those supporting the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan believe that this war has gone on for too long and that it is time for troops to leave. Nation building was not and is not the objective, and given the risk of terrorism is now low, there is no need to stay. Those disagreeing, however, believe that leaving now means all the cost goes to waste, and the US has a duty to protect the Afghan people, not leave their fate up to the Taliban. The Taliban have been keen to push the message that they are not the same people as the pre-2001 Taliban were, and will be more accommodating and tolerant. Whether or not this is truly the case will have to be seen, and it is likely as time goes on since the US withdrawal and re-intervention becomes less likely, that their real colours will emerge. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments or on Twitter. Be sure to check back on Monday for another episode. Thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you soon.